It was always the intention of Dr. Kishore Shallow to one day replace his predecessor, former president of Cricket West Indies, Ricky Skerritt, at the helm of the regional game. And so, unanimously, the board of directors gave him a chance on Saturday, March 30th at the annual general meeting, and he will now assume the presidency of West Indies cricket. But the Vincentian enters the hot seat at a very pivotal and interesting time in West Indies cricket. Success has been very hard to come by for all the teams over the last 7 years since the West Indies men's, women's and the under-19s won the World T20 as well as the under-19 World Cup respectively. He is optimistic about West Indies cricket and regional cricket, but he's also realistic about how long it will take for success to come back to the region. In the next half hour, you'll hear from President of Cricket West Indies, Dr. Kishore Shallow. Interestingly, yesterday, Windies Cricket had a Facebook memory up of the 2016 World Cup winners, both the men and the women. And what a memory that was. 7 years ago on that day, both West Indies men and women's team managed to win a World Cup. And since then, we've sort of struggled to get back to that point, to get back to that peak. What would you attribute to that downward slide?
Well, don't forget the under-19 boys as well, because they also won the World Cup in that year. So it was a triple celebration really for us. And I recall across the region, everywhere you went, everyone was in that, celebratory mood, and it was just brilliant. And we all want to see that again. What I really believe is one of the challenges we have had over the years, and this dated probably back to the 80s, is where after dominating in Test cricket and also the shorter format in time, I think it was 50 overs then, 75, 79 World Cup, we have won those, even the Champions League. But we have failed to capitalize on every format. That momentum we have had, we have failed in every format to continue the consistent success. And I think it's really lack of structure being implemented, right? So we have failed to implement the proper structure in the entire system, and infrastructure as well contributes to that. So we have to improve infrastructure, we have to improve our systems.
When you say we, are you willing to say we as the territorial boards have failed West Indies cricket?
We certainly could do a lot more, and I'm talking about, when I say we, Ryan, I speak of the entire region, right? Because Cricket West Indies, on its own cannot advance our cricket, right? We need collective effort, so we need the governments on board, we need the other stakeholders, which is corporate Caribbean on board, and as I say, it's just a matter of sensitizing each stakeholder of the role that they have to play in movement. So when I say we have sort of failed to advance our cricket, it is a collective responsibility.
But Doc, corporate Caribbean and governments across the region have not and may not and will not invest in territorial boards or feel confident in investing in territorial boards if these territorial boards are failing to progress, are failing to advance. You've spent 4 years as vice president of Cricket West Indies. What is the state of our territorial boards?
So we have to also consider the pandemic, right? But what we have to do is find ways of implementing programs consistent across the region, right? So that is where CWI would take the leadership, take the lead role and ensure that the standards across the region are that they're the same. So whether it's in Trinidad and Tobago, Barbados, Windwards, Leewards, they should all have the same development pathway for every child, boy and girl growing up. And that is what is lacking currently. We don't have those systems. And so when I talk about structure and system, that is exactly what I speak about.
I imagine it's a very difficult conversation for you to have on the back of a unanimous vote for presidency from all territorial boards. But it is an important conversation to have, given that these territorial boards, as much as Cricket West Indies can do and must do, there is only so much Antigua can do. And the headquarters, of course, I'm speaking about the headquarters being in Antigua. But Trinidad and Tobago Cricket, Windward Islands Cricket Board, Leeward Islands Cricket Association, how important is it that they get to a point where they are developing cricketers that are ready for West Indies cricket?
We are quite far So I normally say realistically we are about 15 years behind India, England, and Australia in terms of where we are, right? Where we are now and where we are to be. Now, the fact is that our talent, our raw talent, has made up for that over the years. So we have had glimpses of brilliance and so on and winning World Cups and so on. But in terms of consistency, we lack that, right? And that is no secret. To get that, we must have a formula throughout the entire region. And it is certainly one of the limitations, financial restrictions. Of course, we can't implement the sort of programs that we want to do. And that is the problem the main problem that the territorial boards face, that they do not have the financial freedom really to invest as they really should be doing. Now, how do we do that? And one of the things that I'm recommending now is for CWI, Cricket West Indies, to sort of shape the way with the commercial activities, because certainly if the territorial boards are able to find some sort of financial independence, right, and sort of have more commercial activities, then they'll be able to invest more in their domestic programs. And that is what is necessary to advance the cricket across the region.
Another important conversation to have, and this is a conversation that you and former President Ricky Skerritt had many times in campaigning to become president and vice president in 2019, and then to be re-elected 2 years later, is the fact that, 3 years later, my bad, is the fact that many of these territorial boards and the executives on these territorial boards have been there for a decade or more in some instances. And you all campaigned against, especially at the top, the hierarchy of West Indies cricket, that there should be term limits. That conversation has come, it's left, it's come back, it's left again. How important and how much of a priority is term limits for your presidency?
And there are different arguments for term limit, right? There's the leaders across the region. We don't have term limit in the region, right, for national politics and so on. So it goes to show that there's not necessarily a trend of term limit. However, Ryan, in St. Vincent and the Grenadines Cricket Association, where I've been president from 2014 to 2020, I've introduced term limit. In fact, I ended my tenure there because of the term limit. In Windward Islands, as president there, I also revised the constitution to introduce term limit. And that, I suspect, is evidence that I am a strong believer and advocate of term limit. And I think that is something that we are to explore at Cricket West Indies level. I don't think that the directors are opposed to it. I've seen a couple of directors, including Trinidad and Tobago, introduce term limits. So I think there's some willingness to have that conversation, and we'll see how it goes when we discuss that.
So are you confident and are you willing to tell the people of the Caribbean that you will not only advocate for it in a more serious manner, but get it over the line?
Well, I certainly can't predict the future, if that's what you're asking me to do. But what I would say, I would try and get the buy-in from the other directors, and have that conversation to see if that is the best approach for West Indies cricket.
How critical is it, though? And is it not critical that no one person or no executive holds West Indies cricket, maybe for lack of better words, at ransom throughout an entire decade?
Well, if you ask me if that is one of the contributing factors to where we are in cricket, I would say not necessarily. I think there are other priorities that probably need our attention more urgently than, say, introducing term limit. For example, infrastructure is significantly behind the rest of the world, right? I mean, having term limit doesn't affect so much the direct development of a player in terms of getting indoor facilities to train when rain falls, having proper, consistent pitches that when we go on the international scene, we are not, sort of newcomer to it, right? Only accustomed to when we reach at the international level, the senior level. So these are things that we need to address more urgently. But we have to ensure that we are committed as an organization, as a board, to evolving our governance. That is a non-negotiable. We have to improve, just like we have to improve in cricket, we have to improve in marketing, human capital and so on. We have to look at ways to improve in governance.
Well, I mean, I want to get through so much in the very short time that we have, but will you follow, and I know it's very early, but I'll still ask you the question, will you follow in President Skerritt's footsteps and perhaps just serve 2 terms and then allow somebody else to move on?
Who knows? I mean, Ricky obviously had his reasons for moving on at that time, and my shortest term limit that I have introduced is 6 years in St. Vincent and the Grenadines Cricket Association. And this is not a Kishore Shallow decision. my approach as a leader is to ensure there's inclusivity. There's, so it is not for me to make these decisions. It's to incorporate, not only my directors on the board, but the wider stakeholders. And that would be my approach, Ryan.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about the coaching aspect. We've lost Coach Phil Simmons, who mutually agreed to resign after the World Cup performance last year, left after Australia. West Indies cricket will now head in the direction of two separate coaches, one for the red ball team and one for the white ball team. There was a West Indies first policy that was introduced under President Ricky Skerritt. Will President Kishore Shallow continue with that policy, or are you willing to hire the best person that applies, whether he is from the West Indies or the wider world?
I think currently, I would say 4 years on from 2019, we have a great understanding of our resources in the Caribbean. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with opening up the recruitment process to allow international candidates to apply. And if they, by chance, come out on top in the process, then why not? So we are quite open to international applications.
Did the West Indies first policy ended up hurting West Indies cricket, you feel, more than it helped?
Absolutely not. And I'll tell you why. Because every single one of our exports in the region who have been given an opportunity, they still remain in the Caribbean, and they're still committed to developing West Indies cricket. And that is something that, it has tremendous value. When we look at, call any of the names who have been involved over the last 4 years, and whether it is at the senior level, whether it is male or female, or whether it's in the junior program, they are currently adding value. So I would say definitely it has helped us.
But it hasn't certainly yielded the results that you wanted on the field of play, and especially in tournaments.
But one thing I'm quite realistic about is that no one decision is going to, change the fortunes of our cricket overnight. This thing takes process, right? And it's going to take time. Now, ideally, we want to have more success along the way. But I am not promising anyone that we are going to be dominating world cricket in the next year or two. Certainly not with the deficiencies we have in terms of limited resources and the poor infrastructure that we have in the region. It is a process. What I'm going to do and what I'm committed to do over the next 2 years is to ensure that corporate Caribbean, the governments, and the different stakeholders who could play a key part in coming together, pulling our resources together to advance the cricket. I'm going to ensure that there's that inclusive environment that I speak about in terms of my approach for leadership, that we could all together advance our cricket.
You've said on another program that you are hoping by the end of April that a West Indies head coach, West Indies men's head coach, red and white balls, will be named. Are you still sticking with that timeline?
The timeline is just that for the recruitment process, but you would know that in these processes, there could be a little delay. So, but the current process, application should be closed soon, if not already. Then we have a process of series of interviews and so on, and hopefully we get, by the end of it, the current timeline, we could have two very good coaches. If not, who knows, we might probably have to delay by a couple weeks. But the key thing is to ensure that we have the right persons. And that is quite consistent with, I'm sure you looked at my manifesto during the campaign, it is quite consistent with the pillar of human capital, ensuring that we have the best people in the right positions.
Yeah, I'm looking at that manifesto, and and listening to you speak now, you have decided that there is no quick fix to West Indies cricket, especially the senior men's national team.
In any component for that matter, whether it's male or female, every single different aspect of our cricket, there's no quick fix.
But surely on the back of the Australian series and what we saw in South Africa, maybe crisis is not the right word to use, but certainly there has to be some immediate plans to address what we've witnessed in both Australia and South Africa.
Well, I think greater planning certainly is required. So you would have, I'm sure you probably got the report from that committee led by Justice Thomas, so Brian Lara and Mickey Arthur, right? They produce a few recommendations that we should implement for upcoming World Cups and so on. And I think some of these are very relevant, not only for world events, but series by series. There are some things identified that we could do much better. And we need to start doing these things now. We just had a very successful tour of in South Africa in terms of we lost the Test series, but we did well in the ODIs and the T20. And I've already seen some glimpses of improvement And I'm sure that with two new captains and also, coaches coming in as well, I'm sure there will be that sort of momentum. And I'm hoping that that sort of result, give us some favorable results.
We've seen cricketers from around the region since Brian Lara started working with the senior men's West Indies team in Australia. We saw some cricketers saying good things about him. Is he part of your medium to long-term plans?
Brian Lara, from feedback so far, he is on a 1-year contract now, which still has, probably at least 8 months remaining on the contract. More, I think probably 9 months. And so it is to determine then, how we could engage Brian. But I'll say not just Brian, but there are other legends who I'm sure are quite willing and could contribute meaningfully to the performance of our senior teams, both male and female. But from feedback so far, Brian is doing a fantastic job. One person I could go on record and say, Alec Atenes, who you see has performed really well in the just concluded first-class season. He told me that, directly that his conversation with Brian Lara certainly helped, and that he suspect would help him when he sort of moved to the next level, international cricket. So he's certainly having that immediate impact on some of the players.
Let's talk a little bit about women's cricket and also the women's West Indies team. Have you been surprised or even alarmed by, like I mentioned, the 2016 World Cup victory and how far the women's team has fallen since?
Not totally surprised, because I'm quite a realist, and if we don't implement those systems that are required, we're going to fall behind. It's just, I'm one who studies cricket, so I looked at what ECB is doing as England Cricket Board. I look at what Australia is doing, and India and so on, New Zealand. And while they're winning, they're implementing systems to continue to improve, right? We have not done that over the last few years. And we are at a point now where we have tried having those immediate camps and so on to try to, have a short-term sort of turnaround and success, right? But what we need to do, Ryan, is invest in long-term plans that are going to help us. Now, the thing with implementing long-term plans is that you're obviously not going to get the results next week, right? And so it takes patience, and it's for us to sensitize our fans, the public, right? That it's going to be, we're going to require some patience, but we're going to invest now so that later down the road we could have that consistent success that we all want.
When you say that's not something we've done over the last few years, permit me to tell you that you were in charge over the last few years with President Ricky Skerritt. There was a pandemic that took 2 years, virtually 2 years out of cricket. How would you summarize the Skerritt presidency, and what grade out of 10 would you give the Skerritt presidency?
I won't grade us. Obviously, I'll leave that to you. But when I say few years, I'm not talking about 2-4 years. I'm talking about a decade, right? and even longer, especially when it comes to men cricket. But when it comes to female cricket, since 2016, we have not done anything.
But to my direct question, what have you and how will you summarize the Skerritt presidency, given that at the end of it, you have an England series that you could say that the West Indies won, and you also have a Bangladesh series, and that England series, came just after the first time after the pandemic, or at least we started opening up. Given that those two things are the success factors of the Skerritt presidency, how would you rate it?
Well, the thing is, right, and you can't run from it, that you're in sports and we are in cricket, and we're going to be judged by the results on the field, right? Now, the situation that we met in 2019, and this is not putting any blame on previous dispensations, right? This is just the reality that it was very challenging times when we took office in 2019. And what we have invested a lot in is stabilizing the organization finances, right? And that is not something we could shout about enough, right? And our PR hasn't been excellent by any measurement either, right? But what has happened off the field over the last 4 years, especially in a pandemic, right? It is tremendous. And I would say that Ricky Skerritt has led very well, and I'm quite thankful and quite appreciative of the fact that because of his experience during those difficult times, we have managed to sort of survive the pandemic. And I'll give you a specific example, Ryan, that we are probably one of the few organizations, not only in the region but in the world, that managed an entire pandemic without laying off one individual, right? We kept our full staff, we kept all our players on retainers, right, through the entire pandemic. And I could say that we have introduced a selection policy, and all these things have contributed to what we're probably not seeing the success now, but eventually we'll be in a much better position to invest in development of our cricket going forward.
I want to ask you a couple questions on that. So the first one is, we went from a very turbulent relationship between the Cricket West Indies board before your time in office to one that was much more smoother. But do you feel, and is it correct to assume, that we went from a very turbulent relationship in which the board was very much anti-player to your board, which gave too much power to the player?
I think it's unfair to say that the previous board was anti-player. I don't agree with that at all.
Given the run-ins of the board, and maybe that's not the right word to use, but it certainly, there was a lot of friction, there was a lot of turbulence. But did your board, to my question, did your board give too much power to some players in West Indies cricket, especially the senior players?
I think you're moving from one extreme to the next, right? And that is you, but I don't share that opinion, of course. Now, there were certain efforts from the last dispensation to have a very good relationship with the players, and we continue that, right? It might appear, and probably it is correct to say that we probably enjoyed a smoother relationship with the players. Listen, you want, the players are our key assets, and we want to have the best possible relationship with them. And especially, and I know one of the criticism is where players leave and go and play in leagues and so on, right? Yes, we need to manage that better. Right, we could only do that by sensitizing the players from a very early age how important it is to play for West Indies, and we have to manage the process. Right, a cricketer's career is extremely short, Ryan. Right, and we have to be practical. Yes, we want them to play for West Indies, but we also have to take into consideration that they have their families to feed after they play in cricket. So how are we going to manage that, ensure that they get opportunities to earn revenue, to earn their salaries, so that when they retire they could live comfortably forever, right? And ensure that they play for West Indies so that we can move our cricket forward, because we do have a very limited pool of players. And so it is about management of the players, getting them to appreciate what it means to play for West Indies and so on. But
I'm glad that you said it, because now the Caribbean public, West Indies fans, are looking for the next Kyron Pollard, the next Dwayne Bravo, the next Chris Gale, the next Andre Russell. And they're looking very hard, but they can't seem to find it, because again, the player pool, and we've now had this incredible generation of West Indies T20 cricketers, but they've really left not much behind in terms of we can see who's this next great player coming out from the next batch.
You know, one of the things about New Zealand, why I believe they're so successful, right? And if you look at the English team recently, is the fact that there's no next best player. It is a team sport, right? And so despite West Indies, we have always had a star player, whether it is Brian Lara or Viv Richards or Sir Gary Sobers. In different generations, we have had star players, and we could probably argue now that Shea Hope is that player, or Nicholas Puran. But I think what we need to do is ensure that we have teams, right? A good composition of teams, and different, whether it's male or female, always being on the field and represented. And if we can get that in our players' head from very early, that this is not about a star, right, of one star in the team carrying the team, then I think we'll play much better cricket. And that is something I believe that our analysts are saying now, that it is about stats and getting people to play together as a team and not relying on individuals to win games for us.
Some analysts, and you, I know that you not only participate in many programs across the Caribbean, I believe you were on one yesterday as well. Some analysts believe that Dr. Desmond Haynes, the Right Honourable Dr. Desmond Haynes, who is now the chairman of selectors, the Covenant of Selectors, some analysts believe that he is not being played in the right position, that he should rather be more intimately involved in the careers of some of these batsmen, he himself being a legend, a legendary batsman of the game. Do you foresee that Dr. Desmond Haynes may be shifted from the role that he has right now to play a more intimate role in the batsmen of West Indies cricket?
Two ways to answer that. One, he has a contract that goes up until at least end of next year in that role of lead selector. And two, there's nothing stopping Dr. Desmond Haynes from engaging our batsmen at any level, whether it's at the senior or the junior level. So, and I'm sure that he does that. And however we could encourage him to sort of mentor more players, not only batsmen, but our players generally, then we'll definitely advocate for that.
All right, let's talk a little bit about the governance of West Indies cricket, of which there have been many reports, more than we can count right now. a couple of which came under the presidency of President Ricky Skerritt and yourself as vice president. What is the state of a lot of money, by the way, was spent to yield those reports. What is the state of those reports, and do you see those reports being an intimate part of your presidency?
Well, we're going to definitely take on board all the reports that have been, produced and provided to us. But, I mean, it is again about what is current, because some of these reports that you speak about, and I suspect you're talking about governance from Patterson reports and all these.
Report,
precisely.
The Don Webby report.
Right. The Webby is obviously the most recent one. And one of the things I've observed is that a few of these recommendations over the years have been implemented already, right? You would not think so, because the thing is when a report is presented, right, and if you don't implement all the reports, there could be a perception that you haven't implemented anything, right? So I think one of the issues with Cricket West Indies, and I accept it for my time during my time there as well, and it's something that I've tried to address, is our PR. We have not done a very good job at sensitizing people of what we do at Cricket West Indies.
But you would agree with me, Dr. Shallow, the best PR is teams out on the field doing well.
Correct, right? But also we have to be practical. So I'm sure you follow sports. So I know you understand Maple in hockey in Canada, right? And even Arsenal, I'm a big Arsenal fan, and we have gone how many years without winning any trophy. It doesn't mean that they're not successful. In fact, Arsenal is one of the most lucrative clubs off the field, right? But they haven't won trophies. And we have to accept that when we are going through a transition, right, we are not going to be as successful. This transition hasn't started yesterday. I accept and I appreciate, right? But we have failed to act based on the deficiencies we have had for many years. So when we talk about lack, up to this day, if you go across England, or even Bangladesh, right, and you see the facilities that exist for players, junior players to practice on, right? I mean, there's no comparison to what we have in the region. And we are competing against them, right? So maybe our performance in the past are what has sort of obviously set the expectations, right? But these countries are advancing. They're implementing plans and programs, investing so that they could improve, while we are pretty much stagnant and just think that raw talent is going to dominate world cricket. It is not like that. It is not going to happen. And that is what I want people to understand. I want spectators to understand, because spectators are you and I, CEOs of organizations, prime ministers and presidents across the region, and they are hurting every time we lose. But they must also appreciate that they need to invest in cricket, and it is the only way we are going to get back to that success. And I could tell you, I've had a few conversations with some of the leaders, current leaders of the region, and I think they're right there in understanding their role, and they're willing to play this role.
When President Ricky Skerritt came to office and you were vice president back then, the idea of the presidency seemed to be, and I had the honor of talking to you gentlemen on multiple occasions, the idea of the presidency seemed to be, by the end of it, we will show the Caribbean public, and the Caribbean public will be optimistic that, okay, some change in leadership, some change in the way we operate, some change in the way the culture of West Indies cricket is, will be tangible, will be seen, will be visible. Is that now, perhaps at the end of the Skerritt presidency, that was not achieved? Is that now your goal, that by the end of your presidency, that the public, the Caribbean public, will look back and see, well, I actually saw real change in West Indies cricket, in the governance of West Indies cricket, more so if not on the field?
Absolutely. My intention is to ensure that we improve in every component of West Indies cricket. There are a lot of moving parts, but I think if we can get our commercial activities right, generate more revenue, we could invest more in cricket development. That would obviously translate to better pathway management of our players, and you will see some improved results on the field. So definitely, Ryan, the intention, I'm obviously hoping that there's no more pandemic around the corner, but I'm quite optimistic at this point that West Indies cricket at the end of my tenure is going to improve.
Dr. Kishore Shallow, you're about 8 or 9 games away from winning the English Premier League this season as an Arsenal fan. So good luck to you in your presidency, and good luck to Arsenal.
I definitely need that, but thanks again, Ryan, always a pleasure, and looking forward again.